I don't like that system where you have to part with some of your money to unlock your entire salary. I can't believe you would leave money on the table. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, I'm leaving some money on the table for when I'm 65, sure, or 59 and a half, but it's costing me 5% to do that. Would you lock your kid away till you're 59 and a half? No. Would you outsource raising your children? I treat my money like a part of my family. Treat your capital like family. Your capital feeds the people you love. Stop treating it like a stranger's science project. All right, everyone, welcome back to Remnant Finance. We've got another solo episode today. Brian is still over there, and we are waiting for any word on when he might be coming home. But as of now, that still remains TBD because there appears to be no end in sight. And I'm sure we are all getting quite tired of winning, especially when winning looks like it does. But yeah, it's pray for Brian, pray for his safety. There's a lot of action right now, and there's a lot of stuff that's different than what the news seems to indicate. And so keep him and his family in your prayers, and we look forward to getting him back here soon. However, we're going to press on today. Got a solo one. Had a great string of interviews over the last couple of weeks. I've really enjoyed talking to David Zapata and Paul McHale from Fact and Financial, talking more with Roe, Travis McBride on annuities. So Back to it today, and this one's going to be kind of a fun. It's a loose analogy, so bear with me. But I've really just been thinking about the idea of 401ks, and if you listen to our podcast regularly, you know we are in the business of beating dead horses. We take a horse that's already dead, and we can just continue to wail away. However, I think that's necessary because there's a phrase for beating a dead horse in the negative sense, but there's not really. I can't really think of what the exact verbiage would be for beating the dead horse of something that you agree with or believe. As in for decades now, or as many years as you've been alive, or at least have been an adult in the business of earning and stewarding and spending your capital, as long as you've been involved with generating your income and how to manage it, you have been. The dead horse of what to do with your money has been beaten into by marketing. So I feel okay with us beating a dead horse because there needs to be a continuous drumbeat of independent thinking, critical thinking on a lot of the topics around money. And so when we have these sacred cows, we have these things that are just considered untouchable and are just the defaults. It takes a lot to kind of hammer out of that shell. And that's what we want to do. So if you've listened to us for a while, none of this that we're going to talk about today, this idea of would you raise your child like a 401k? Would you raise your children with the rules and the limitations imposed by the 401k system? Something on one hand, it's almost silly to say when we describe it. And I'll have to say that there's sort of like a loose analogy here that we can make. If we make the actual direct analogy of the facets, the elements, the attributes of a 401k, and then apply that directly to raising a child, it doesn't quite translate directly there, but as sort of we can sort of expand the scope there and make a decent parallel as far as just the lack of control, the lack of oversight, the long-term delaying of any kind of value creation or anything like that. And so bear with me on the analogy here. It's not perfect, but it's just been, I don't know if I'm confident that I'm not the one who thought of it like that. I know that I've heard that from someone, whether it's Garrett Gunderson or Tom Wall or some of the other folks that I listen to regularly and learn from who had this kind of this question here. It's certainly not my own question. I just can't recall because it's something I've thought for so long and have thought through for years now that I can't attribute the quote directly. And it's probably something that maybe every IBC podcast has kind of talked through. But I'm going to explore that idea, kind of pick it apart a little bit. I want to steelman the 401k because it's not just like, it's not a bad thing. I mean, there's 40 trillion in qualified plans for a reason, right? It exists and it has value. And I want to talk about the value. I'm just going to give counters to how we view that and what we think is perhaps a better solution for some people. Got a caveat with that. And not necessarily saying like this is a bad thing that you shouldn't do, but just why, if we kind of extrapolate that to raising a child, why it seems preposterous on one hand, and then the default on the other. And so, but yeah, and then you might also, we've been talking, I've been kind of dropping, not hinting, I've been straight up saying, but I've sort of talked loosely about what we're doing, what Brian and I are working on kind of behind the scenes, not with Remnant Finance, but I want to, if you've heard what we've talked about, we're building out Remnant Frontier, which is going to be our registered investment advisory. That's going to be an asset management arm. That's the growth side of things, right? And so maybe for the past 2 years of the podcast, 2 years plus, and the 4 years or so we've been a company, we've had a pretty consistent message of being your own CFO, taking control, stop being a passenger, right? You don't need to outsource this knowledge. And so you might say, well, why are we then hopping into the driver's seat for people with this Remnant Frontier concept? Why are we've kind of dogged on the CFP model for a long time and the retirement Inc. model, as Joe Withrow calls it. So are you guys just gonna like give up on, or like, where is the disconnect there? And so I do want to talk through what we're trying to build. This is a future business, right? This is not a present service. I have to start speaking in disclaimers as we geared up towards this, because once you become securities license and once there is an advisory in place, like once there's actual registered investment advisory, a lot of what we say on here has to be tailored through the lens of compliance, because you can't just give advice, right, general or specific, without a lot of caveats now. And so again, this is like, here's what with the 401k discussion, I want it to be, here's what good advice looks like, not like, here's why you should invest with us on the growth side, right? But I want to talk through the value proposition that we have and why I think, despite the market being absolutely flooded with investment advisors, with CFPs, like there is an enormous market for financial advice. And so why are we going to throw our hat into the ring here? I think we have a value proposition beyond asset allocation models, right? If you have a fairly high financial IQ, it's something that you can grade. But if you feel confident in understanding the markets, understanding, how the different assets, the different products, the wrappers around stocks effectively, in the large part of how we talk about portfolio management, again, we're mostly talking about stocks and bonds here. And so on the equity and debt side, if you understand how those products work, if you understand, say, the difference between preferred stock and common stock, if you understand the difference between convertible bonds, callable bonds, cumulative bonds, et cetera. Like if you have a pretty good grasp on the basics and you generally know where you want to get to, i.e., if you're going to take the retirement Inc. playbook of I want a diversified, again, not diversified across asset classes, but just in my market, in my 401k, in my market exposure between equity and debt, i.e., stocks and bonds, I want to have the largest pool possible by age 65. I want to rebalance my portfolio once a quarter to reallocate across like percentages. I want to do the general dial down of risk as I get older. That playbook, right? And a lot of the things that are default, you don't need, in my opinion, you don't need a financial planner to do that if you have, one, the knowledge. And we want you to have the knowledge. Our whole reason for existence with this podcast is so that we convey the knowledge that we have in hopes that you do your own digging and not just taking our word for it, but kind of grow with us as we learn. And so if you have that knowledge, and two, if you have the discipline, that's a big part. That's a big thing. Like not having the discipline, not having a good habit, that can derail whatever plan you're doing, whether you're doing the conventional model, whether you're doing the strategies we talk about. It's up. You are the biggest factor in that, you and your behavior, not are you doing IBC? Are you doing conventional financial planning? Are you just trying to max out your retirement account at 65? Whatever path you're on, the biggest determinant is your behavior, even more so than your knowledge. And so there is a, on the I guess on the spectrum here of like behavior and knowledge, if we did kind of like the 4-sector graph, like just a plus sign, right? And on one scale is, knowledge from like basic knowledge to advanced knowledge. And on the behavior side, it's reckless to disciplined. And you could put kind of any of these 4 quadrants and sort of move out on those 2 axes. There's certainly there's a section of that where you might fall, where the 401k max by 65 model is absolutely what you need, and it is a better strategy than the strategies we talk about. We tend to be higher discipline. I'd say more advanced knowledge, even though it's not really like you don't need advanced knowledge, but you can't be financially illiterate. But on those two metrics, discipline is definitely required for ours. And so if you're the type where the money is going to flow out regardless of what you do, you probably just need your conventional CFP. And then the question is, okay, do I need somebody to do this for me? Or honestly, a lot of people, if you have moderate financial knowledge and pretty weak discipline, but you know you need to invest in the market, diversify across your stock picks, right? Diversify across, the stocks and bonds. If you're going to do that 60-40, however you want to tackle that, if that's the route you're going, you may need someone to quarterback that for you. But as far as the actual moves you make, you can really accomplish that with a Claude subscription and just some willingness to learn. Now, that willingness to learn piece is something that a lot of people don't have. A lot of people might want to, but don't have the time for it or don't think that they can. And so there is a very real need for someone to quarterback, and that's why the industry is as large as it is. And so entering an industry like financial planning that is so saturated, it seems like a bad call when we have our defined, carved out niche in the whole life market, where we are experts at this one product, know it inside and out, and have a very good business based on teaching and implementing this strategy, right? So why branch out from that? And so the value proposition that I really want to bring with Remnant Frontier, which is going to be a separate company, right? For compliance reasons, it's a nightmare. We could not have them in the same bucket. Two totally separate companies, but under the overall umbrella of like a head coach almost, where you have a defensive coordinator and offense coordinator. Another loose analogy here, right? The protection and savings coordinator, that is Remnant Finance. That is your IBC advisor. That is working with someone, so hopefully NNI authorized IBC practitioner, but someone who understands the whole life product and what we're trying to do with it, right? And then beyond that, and of course, our protect, save, grow in that order framework, we think that is the more critical role. Right? Because again, if you have that in place, that implies that you have some discipline and some understanding, right? You have this more advanced savings and protection strategies in place. You understand and utilize whole life, et cetera. You do everything that we talk about in this podcast with Remnant Finance. At that point, you honestly, in my opinion, really only need a Claude subscription, $100 a month, $18 a month for the lowest tier, whatever you want. But you can really get your ETFs fine-tuned to maximize by age 65. You get a full suite of analysis, like effectively with the tools available right now. Like the Perplexity computer has a very advanced financial planning software. You can really have your own Bloomberg terminal effectively, and you can make these products for yourself that will do a lot of the things that you can have someone else do. And so I think that there's going to be a need. There's going to be a lot of people that are offering what Claude can now do as a highly paid service that are going to find themselves without much new business, right? But where we really intend to provide additional value is a deep understanding of not just the asset side, but the protection and savings side. Bridging that gap there, and the idea that like your distribution years, right? Your drawdown years. Once you flip the switch and now we are on quote retirement mode, we've been building up. Like Claude can get you to 65 with a balanced portfolio, right? If that's what you want. That's not really the hard part in a market that looks like it does for the last 20 plus years. That's not really the hard part. The hard part is all of the stuff that comes after that. And that's where you especially want to have someone who is dialed in to the specifics of your savings, your whole life strategy, to coordinate with your quote offensive coordinator, right? Like whatever, I'm thinking football, but like your OC, right? You want to have the person who's managing this growth. I want that conversation to be a constant one. Like, hey, we need X amount of dollars this month, and the market just did, just took a little haircut here. Let's go ahead and just pull a month from the cash value, right? Borrow against that, keep that growing in the background. We're earning full dividends on the cash value. The cash value is growing uninterrupted. We have a loan against that. And instead of touching our down market right now, like touching our assets in the down market, we're not going to do that. Like having that kind of fine-tuned coordination, even on like a monthly basis at that point, I think is invaluable. And I think that's where the big gap in the industry is. So we want to have that protection and the growth under one roof. Like cash value is our buffer. We're going to coordinate this in house. And And I think that we are going to be able to offer what your CFP will offer and what your IBC advisor will offer. So being that kind of that head coach role. And so beyond just the selection of like, we're going to have model portfolios that you can pick, or that you can allocate across. I'm really working on an income and cash flow portfolio where investing into a cash flow bucket is going to generate consistent, strong cash flow returns, right? We're also going to have your typical, like, if you want, a model that's just geared towards kind of allocating and strategically rebalancing for a certain time frame, that kind of thing too. Like that's honestly easy to do, but where we can really provide more value besides the deep knowledge of whole life is on a lot of like alpha on the tax side, right? And so tax loss and tax gain harvesting, asset allocation, you choosing the right asset in the right account, Roth conversions, the order of your withdrawals, right? So that the actual tax sequencing of when you take those withdrawals. Also the charitable plays. There's a lot of ways using the charitable mechanisms that you can generate enormous tax value there, right? A lot of them, it's still a sunk cost, right? You might sink 50 grand into a charitable play and lose that 50 grand, but you save more in taxes. And so it's coordinating all of those things. The income and the decumulation phases. So again, sequence of return protection is the highlight here that every retiree should be very aware of. And it seems like not many are in-depth tracking that, right? And so I want to be, if I'm at that point and I'm taking monthly distributions or annual distributions, I want to know personally, what is the market doing this month? I want to be, I personally, I don't want that outsourced to somebody else as far as what percentage, if I'm doing that 4%, what percent can I take out this month without, messing up the projections, all that stuff, all these simulations, right? And again, we don't really buy those simulations. I don't buy the 4% rule. I don't buy this entire model, but people do want that. And people, if they're going to have that, it should be coordinated with a well-funded savings and protection component with your defensive coordinator there, you might say. The timing of taking your Social Security, RMD planning, you have these different buckets, which one is optimal to fund this year's spending. Also want to do some estate and legacy, like looking at your beneficiaries, depending on the beneficiaries of certain accounts, like a Roth IRA, for instance, or your 401k, like having beneficiaries in place or not is a very big problem for the people who will be getting the money down the road if you don't have that laid out, right? So just kind of reviewing all that stuff. We want to be more holistic than just here's the ETF to pick until you're 65. And then of course, like behavior, discipline, just when we have these big drawdowns, like you should not be stressed because you don't need to worry about pulling from the market if you've done it right on the other side of the ledger there. Keeping the discipline, keeping you honest, it's always much easier to give, to like kind of see the whole picture when you're looking for a third party's looking at a situation than when you're in the middle of it, looking at it and making these decisions. Someone who's kind of coaching and able to provide value when you might be missing something or overlooking something, like that's where we want to position ourselves on the growth side of the ledger with Remnant Frontier. And then also with business owners, I'm learning a ton right now going through the coursework on business planning. So that course involves a ton of study of entities, the taxation, the formation, the dissolution of entities, when you might use them, how they interact with the different, like how life insurance in these different entities plays, how like the gains within these entities are taxed. All of that stuff is pretty heavily covered in this material, but by no means are we experts in business planning, but we know people that are. And so entities, formation, exiting, secession for your entities, doing the solo 401k, the SEP IRA, all of these facets of being a business owner as well. We will have partners in place that we work with that are experts in these fields. And so all of those things, kind of a lot of advisors also offer those. Like I'm certainly not saying that when Remnant Frontier is up and running, that it is going to be like a unicorn here. Like we're going to offer, a lot of what I just listed of those things, tax loss harvesting, asset allocation, Roth conversions, those kind of things. It's not like that's going to be unique to us. What is going to be unique to us is one, our philosophy, our mindset, our branding, right? And so just, if you understand how we think on Remnant Finance, you'll have a good idea of how we're going to approach the asset allocation and the asset management side of things once this is up and running. And so we'll keep you posted on that. And just know that when I'm talking about the 401k, a lot of it, like as I'm kind of reading through the notes that I took, I'm like, well, aren't we contradicting this by doing something similar to this in Remnant Frontier? And perhaps. And so take this challenge of the idea to heart, and think about how you um, how you feel is not the right word, but like just be willing to examine your assumptions or your thoughts on a 401k, for instance. Because I don't need to really give my opinion on it. I have a pretty strong one personally, but it's more just, are you willing to question and think through? So with that in mind, I'm gonna first start with like kind of a steel man. I want to make the honest case for the 401k, because there is a case for it. It does have a lot of value, and that's evidenced by the fact that it is such a large part of financial services. And then we're going to talk about some of the attributes of it that, if we were to apply to raising a child, I can't even really say it with a straight face. I have to kind of extend the analogy because it's so preposterous. And so yeah, take that for what it's worth. So I'm going to give it its honest due here. So the steelman case for a 401k, the highlight for a lot of people, and advice that's pretty common, is at least take the match. You're leaving money on the table. If you're basically like 50 cents on the dollar, for every dollar you put in, if you get another dollar, you're getting that amount half off effectively. You could really dive into the economics of how pay is structured and pay and compensation. And if you look at compensation as a all-encompassing product of like when a company is going through the process of determining employee compensation, the fact that the match is built in, that's part of the economic value that you're offering to an employee on the whole, right? And so it's kind of like, if you don't take that, what the company values your labor at doesn't really change. You're just not opting into a part of it. Same way, like if you're married, if you're in the military, right, and you have dependents, you get more money than if you don't. But that doesn't mean that it's like everyone gets 100%, and if you get married, you get 105% because you get a little bit more. There's dependent pay scale and there's no dependent pay scale, right? Well, in reality, the 100% is the dependent pay scale, and you just opt for less if you have no dependents, right? You're saying effectively, I'll take 95%, and I can opt into 100%. And so, yes, it's free money, because if you don't take it, you've left some of the economic value of your total compensation package on the table. You just didn't pick that up. Now, it's not free money in the sense that if you told your employer, hey, instead of offering me the match, just pay me that economic value directly to me, they wouldn't do it, right? Because they wouldn't do it because, one, the people that don't take advantage of it saves them on the total compensation package, because people are opting for a discounted package. And two, they get tax benefits from offering that and having this program. And so yes, it's free money, but you're kind of, I mean, I'm not going to say that you're paying for it in another way. It's just really, it's in the structure of the holistic structure of your employee compensation. I don't like that system where you have to part with some of your money to unlock your entire salary. I don't like it at all personally, but I get it. It's 50 cents on the dollar. You put a dollar in, they match you a dollar. So you have to come up with at least that. And so the general advice that people would say is, if you're getting a 5% match, you should put 5% of your paycheck towards the 401k. I'm not going to say not to do that, because if you can get a 10%, contributions to your 401k by only putting in 5%, of course, like as a rate, that's solid, right? There's a lot of LinkedIn posts and article about it. It's so crazy that people don't put in the match. I can't believe you would leave money on the table. And it's like, okay, well, that's, I'm leaving some money on the table for when I'm 65, sure, or 59 and a half. But it's costing me 5% to do that. And so that if it's $100,000 salary, just for easy numbers, like I still have to put away that $5,000 today and lock it away. And so if you fully believe in the value of locking that money away, then yeah, it's a no-brainer. If you're not comfortable with the idea that if I put this $5,000 in this vehicle, it cannot produce any cash flow for me. It's subject to the whims of the market. Like, yes, it's very likely going to go up because the dollar is going to keep being debased, asset price inflation, sure. But I don't love giving away 5% in order to have them match me in, my money jail, by 5% as well. But okay, sure, the match is free money. We'll take that. And so that is a strong point there. If you can, by parting with 5 today, if you can get that 5 back and another 5 effectively, or like, what I'm saying, like it's a thing. It's a thing. Sure, it's probably the strongest talking point after the tax benefits. And so the tax benefits are real as well. We've talked about that a lot. Like, of course, not paying taxes on your Roth 401k. That's very real. A traditional, unless you're in a very high income, like a very high income earner, to me, it's hard to justify a traditional because I like the idea of paying tax on the seed and not the harvest. So just remember, when you take withdrawals down the road, 100% of that is going to be taxable, right? I don't love that, but there is a case for that, and depending on how high your income is, it might make sense to do that because the tax savings today are worth it. But remember, the 401k is a tax plan. It's a tax advantage in the IRS code, in the IRC. There's a lot of tax advantages in the IRC. There's tons and tons and tons of them. The IRC is mostly a way to get around the taxation of income, right? So if you can't remember the exact stats anymore, but I do have it in my tax code that I have on the shelf back there. I have the section, just for visual effect, I have it highlighted of what defines income, and I barely have a marker thin enough to do that. And then the part that is not highlighted there is the part that's all the ways that you can get around calling something income, all of the quote, like the tax breaks, you could say. And so there's a lot of tax breaks in the tax code. It is mostly a map for avoiding taxation on income. Some of them you qualify for, some of them you don't. Some of them are good for you, some of them are not. 401k is one section of one chapter of the code. And so, yes, there's value in the tax benefits. If you're getting the deduction today, that's great. You're paying less tax today on your income because you reduce that taxable income. But when you take those RMDs down the road, you will have 100% taxation on everything you pull out, the seed and the harvest. All right. The behavioral side I mentioned before, this is where the 401k really does shine. Now, I consider it a negative that you walk into a job and without knowing anything about it, without knowing who the custodian is, you don't need to know a single thing. Like you don't even, if someone could say 401k, what's that? I've never heard of that, and have one. And they could have one that they're contributing to without knowing it. And so for people that is a benefit for, then it really is. Like if you're that person, if you're low on the discipline scale and you're low on the knowledge scale, that is where this shines, because this forced savings is a way that you're putting money away for a time when you otherwise would very likely spend it. If you have low discipline and low financial literacy, the fact that you go into a job and they sign you up automatically for a 401k and they contribute automatically to a 401k for you, that really is a blessing for you. That's like defeating your own that's defeating your own self-sabotaging behavior, right? So I really do think there's value in that. Now, personally, my forced savings habit is my whole life premium, because I know that is a vehicle that is generating a lot more value to me than simply maximizing taxable dollars by the time I'm in my 60s, right? But that forced savings habit, like there's a lot of people who get to 60 and realize, hey, I didn't even know this was happening, or I knew, but I didn't know anything about it. I couldn't explain any details, but this just happened, and now I actually have a fairly sizable chunk of money. Now we've seen the numbers, like that's not really, if you look at the averages, but for someone who would otherwise spend that money, for them to have a $250,000, which is kind of right in the median for a retiree, I'd say like 200. I think was the when we walked through all those stats according to all of the big brokerage houses in that ballpark. Like the average 65-year-old, I want to say was around 200,000, which means a lot have more, a lot have less. More have less than have more because of the way that averages work and the fact you can only go to zero. Whereas the long end can be drawn out as far as possible, technically infinitely. And so it's not a great number, but if that person would otherwise have spent that money because that 5% that they didn't put in and the 5% match, if that money would have been just siphoned out through spending, then yeah, having that 200,000 or having that amount of whatever that amount is that you wouldn't otherwise have, that is a very strong pro for the 401k for certain people. And so yeah, it does perform as advertised. It's a tax savings for when you're 60 plus, or it's a tax savings for now. And I always default to talking about it like it's a Roth because to me, in most situations, I'm going to take a Roth because I don't want it to be taxed on the harvest. I want to, the same way that I take a post-tax dollar and put it into whole life premium, and once it's in whole life premium, all of the value of it is outside of the tax system, right? The growth, borrowing against it, and the ultimate death benefit, all of that is tax free, technically tax deferred, as long as the policy is enforced when I die, but effectively tax free. And so once I put $1 into my whole life premium, it now is removed from taxation for all intents and purposes. In the same way, once I take $1 and put it into a Roth IRA, it's already been taxed today, and now all the growth I can get, it's going to be tax free down the road. I prefer that for myself. So I always talk about Roth as if it's tax-free in retirement, but it's not. It's actually an enormous tax hit down the road in retirement. And they say you're going to be in a lower tax bracket, but we don't know that. And if we're going this route where this is the primary source of our income, well, how much income do you think you're going to need to live off of down the road? I don't buy that if you're living off $100,000 now, you're going to be okay with 70 in 25 years. I mean, to me, that's preposterous. And so I think if you're living off of a 4% withdrawal from your portfolio, if that's your strategy, I think you're going to have a nasty surprise when you find out that the amount of income needed down the road is way higher than it is now, but the tax brackets haven't changed with it to the degree, or the thresholds for income haven't changed to where like they're not going to keep pace with each other. And so if you live off 100 now, and this is just again going back to that kind of conventional CFP conversation, you live off 100 right now. When you're in retirement, you're not going to have a house payment. The kids are going to be out of the house, and so your expenses are going to go down. So we'll target 70%. So you need 70% income, and then let's take a 2% inflation rate, and maybe you'll need 86 by the time you get to retirement, whatever that number is. I think it's very plausible to expect that number is going to be less than half of what you're actually going to need to live at that point. If you're in your 30s right now, and you do, if those are your numbers, right? This is very simplified, but let's just say with an inflation adjustment, you determine you'll need 86 grand a year. I think you'll need more like 160. I think you're like half of, but again, that's all projection. But if that's what you were basing it off of, and that's what you plan for, and now you need twice as much as you thought you might need, then the tax bracket, like you're going to be in a higher tax bracket than you're planning for right now. Cause I don't think the thresholds and the brackets are going to move as much as the cost of living is going to increase. That's my speculation, but that's why I really, really personally would never consider the traditional because of those elements. The fact that the cost of living is going to outrun the increase in the thresholds for this marginal tax system that we have. But okay, so let's wrap that up. So what makes it work? What makes a 401k a good thing? It's one, primarily, you never have to think about it. Set and forget it. That is the whole pitch. Now that's against our pitch, right? We don't like that pitch, but that is a very strong selling point for a lot of people, right? So that's actually a compliment for a lot of people. And I'd say that financial literacy is not something our country is known for. And so that might be why it is such a prevalent like the pillar of most financial plans. And I remember in grad school doing a class on behavioral marketing, and this was a case study. It was like it was two major things that were like cited as victories for behavioral marketing. One of them was the 401k. One of them was an organ donation. It was like when we automatically opt into organ donation, the friction to not be an organ donor became really high. And so we went from 15% that took the time to actually opt in to 2% that actually took the time to opt out, right? So they increased the rates of organ donors, right? Now, that's a whole nother conversation. I'm no longer, the more I've learned, I'm no longer comfortable with organ donation because of the incentive structures that I've talked to doctors who talk about the element of if someone is an organ donor or not playing into decisions. And so I mean, not the purpose of today's conversation, but I still have it on my license because I opted into it, or I didn't opt out of it. But that's not like the automatic win I thought it was, though. I think probably on net it's like done a lot of good. But I know people now after the last 5 years are a lot less comfortable leaving any decisions to the medical community outside of emergency care. But in that emergency care situation, that's where you might be in a situation where that organ donation element comes into play. But regardless, that is cited as a very positive outcome of switching behavior automatically and making the friction in the way that you want things, or like making the friction where you don't want people to go, right? And the same thing with the 401k. People weren't opting in because they didn't know. People don't just make, financial decisions like that they don't understand without all the tracks being greased, And so when they changed it to where you automatically opt into a 401k, they found out that, 401k uptake, you could call it, shot off the charts, right, relative to what it was. And so, is that a good thing for a lot of people? Yeah, it probably is. And so the things that make it a really good thing for someone on that quadrant of lower financial IQ, lower discipline, to me, make it a pretty terrible product for someone on the other end. But let's go through the rules one at a time, and then we'll kind of talk about if you were to take this approach with your kid, it just gets absurd quickly. And so the box, so effectively locking it away, penalizing for touching it, right? Now, again, would you lock your kid away until you're 59 and a half? No. But when we talk about the money, that literally is the rule. You're going to contribute for decades. If you need to access it early, you pay a penalty to get it. And so that penalty, if it's a Roth, is going to be on the gains. You can take the contributions out penalty-free and tax-free. But if it's a traditional, you're going to pay tax and penalty, 10% penalty and income tax on both the contributions and the gains. That's a big deal, right? And so that friction prevents a lot of people from doing it. And so again, back to point number one, which is that who does this work for and what are the positive attributes? For people, like that friction in place is a good thing. That might save them from themselves, right? Now, would you do this with your children? Of course, you're not going to lock them in a box. That's preposterous. But would you outsource raising your children? And I guess I'd say that a lot of people actually do. If you view the school system as the government raising your children, and starting at 4 years old, going into daycare and then going into the school system and then doing after school care, like I'd say a lot of people are outsourcing the raising of their children to the state. But of course, I know like that probably comes across as harsh. And I know a lot of people don't have the ability to not have both parents working. And in that case, you need to have your, you need someone watching your children. And pre-K or TK as they call it out here, I can't remember, it's like pre-K and then TK and then kindergarten. There's no education value in those. It really, it's just daycare in my opinion. And I get it. I get why people need to do that. But so it's almost kind of like, would you completely outsource the raising of your child till they're 60 and hope, check in later and hope it's all good? No, you wouldn't do that. But I think a lot of us, our system makes it very easy to outsource the education of your child via the public school system that you have to effectively opt out of, right? The friction in the same vein, the friction is to opt out of the education system. The easy thing to do where you get no questions and you don't have to do any research or any work is to do the public school system. We're in California and we're homeschooling. And so there's a lot of friction there. We have to actually do applications, and we have to, starting next year when our daughter's 6, we're going to have to actually prove that we're, the burden of proof goes higher. Whereas if they're in the public school system, the burden of proof is on the Department of Education or the state Department of Education, whatever. And like, they're going to get a pass. They're going to get a check in the box, right? Where we have to actually put in work to prove that we're teaching her things, because we're the ones undertaking the friction to take her out of the public school system. And so you wouldn't just neglect your kid until they're 60, but let's just kind of scale that down till when they're 18. are you going to check in when they're 18 and then see how they are? No, of course not. And you want to be involved, and I want to be the one educating my daughter. Um, I want to be the one that's like responsible for and active in her being raised with like learning manners, behavior, socialization, and then of course education as well. Like I put up very tight walls around my girls, right? I don't let the state in for any reason at all. Medically, education, financially, the state I'm like a savage against the state in every facet of life. And so my girls are not going to have any interaction with the state if I can help it, and I can help it. And so this idea that we're going to outsource the raising of our children, one thing we notice here where we live, it's not really the real world. I mean, because it's this 2 square mile island, obscenely wealthy zip code, and so we see a lot of things that you wouldn't really see in almost any other zip code in the country. For instance, it still blows our mind. We go to the playground here, and we'll see kids that are my daughter's peers. We know the parents, or we at least we don't know them well, but like we see them. We could pick the parents out because we see them at like the library or some event or something. There's a lot of community events here at the rec center, stuff like that. And so it's like I know who your parents are, and I know that's not your parent with you at the playground. And this could be like 11 o'clock on a Tuesday. Like this is not, it's not like watching someone for an hour after school or something. Like situations where I know one of the parents doesn't work, and sometimes you'll see the mom at the playground and a nanny with the mom for one kid, or sometimes you'll see two nannies and the mom for two kids, or sometimes you'll see two or three nannies for a group of a couple children, and it's like the nanny, like they're like these Mexican abuelas, right? Like 3 or 4 nannies kind of standing off to the side, chatting and hanging out, and then maybe 2, maybe 6 kids that are just running around the playground. And so I know personally people who have that set up, and I know there's a parent at home just chilling, right? And that to me is pretty preposterous. And so I'm not against the idea of a nanny. Like we're talking about, it would be great to have mother's helper or whatever. If we can find like a middle school or high school girl in the summer who wants to come over for a few hours and just be around and helping with things while my wife's doing stuff at home, like we'd be here. Like we're very much we don't really leave our girls with like a babysitter or anything like that. It's got to be family, at least now, and I know that's not possible for a lot of people, so this is not like a criticism, but there is I am critical of the Coronado playground Mexican nanny standing off to the side with your kids all day. And like we'll be at a cooking class at the rec center, swim lessons, library events or whatever, and it's like we see kids, we know who their nannies are more than we know their parents, even because I might see their parents one time, like, oh yeah, you're the kid that's always with that nanny probably 8-10 hours a day. And again, I'm not trying to like knock the need for public school for people, or the need, or not the strong desire to have a nanny. Like I totally resonate with that. Cause like, of course, like the kids are exhausting, but the extreme example of this is something that we probably see here more than in a lot of places. So this may not resonate as much if you live in most of America, but here what we'll see is like at 3, the kid's off to daycare and has a nanny when they're not in daycare. At 4, the kid's in preschool, or TK, as they call it here, and has a nanny when they're not in TK. And then kindergarten, they're in school, half day or whatever, then they're with a nanny. And then 1st grade through 12th grade, they're at school all day. And so to me, we know personally families who kind of send their kids off in the morning, see them at 4 or 5 o'clock, and that's when they interact with them. Now that sounds normal in high school, right? I remember, that's how, if you go to public high school, which I did, like that's how it is, right? But these are 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, and those years are so, they're so precious. I mean, I could never imagine leaving my girls like that, and missing all of this. Of course, I got to balance like the fact that I do have to work. But I remember the one time that I missed one of my girls' birthday was when I was doing this bullshit IA in Kingsville, which is a funny story. In the Navy, when I was in that 2-year window of being benched from flying, and they said, you can't fly, you can't do anything, your orders are frozen, but we found a good job for you. You're going to go to Kingsville, Texas for 6 months and help the instructors there, the T-45, which is the training jet when guys are going to go in the F-18 pipeline. They go to Kingsville for a stage of flight school. Well, they're really backed up there. And so if you go there, you can help them by doing their ground job, so the instructors can fly more sorties, right? Get more X's, get more flights complete, so they can knock out 3 or 4 flights a day without having to worry about their ground job, because you can just go absorb some of those ground jobs. So they sent me there, and I check in, and they're like, "You're not T-45 qualified." I said, "No, I'm a helicopter guy." Like, "Well, you can't do any of the jobs." And I said, "Yeah, I know." I said, "Well, why are you here?" I said, "Because some idiot wearing Eagles, like for us a captain or a colonel for the rest of the military, like." Some colonel, effectively, some 06, just decided that, well, we can't do anything with him while we're not allowing him to fly and we're not allowing him to proceed on orders. So we're just going to find odd jobs for him, and this feels like a good fit. So I sat, and they paid like $40,000 for me to have a suite at the Marriott near the Kingsville base. And so I just studied life insurance all day and worked out because I had no job, right? But all that to say, it was really funny. Like, I'm not exaggerating when I say that my one job for the 2 months that I ended up being there was when new instructors checked in, I would add them to the Slack channel. No joke, that is the job they gave me, and I can prove that if anyone says no way the government misuses resources that bad that they would pay $40,000 in lodging and probably about $60,000 total for me to spend 2 months. And my sole purpose, I can show you in emails if you really want to verify this, my sole job was to add people to a Slack channel. Not even exaggerating a little bit. So that is that's your tax money at work. Or that's your deficit spending at work, I should say, more accurately. But anyways, all that to say, that was just it's a funny story that still makes me laugh. But I remember my older daughter turned 2, and I remember sitting in the parking lot, FaceTiming her, and just being like sad to miss that, and just angry at the situation. I wasn't really in a good place during that time frame, but I just remember saying, like, I'm never going to miss another birthday again. And so comparing that to the idea that I could let my 5-year-old go from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and then just check in at the end of the day, like, we'd miss the whole day. And so my wife and I very much value our ability to be hands-on and to be a wall around our girls. And so that's, like, to me, that's natural, and that's what I want to do. And I think that's a goal that everyone hopefully can strive for, but I know some people don't want that. Some people like the idea of, like, giving up control. It doesn't resonate with me at all. But that idea, like, pulling that string a little more, there's an article, I don't know if it's an article, is called Wait But Why, but don't quote me. That might be a totally different article. But I remember that there's an article basically, like, blocks out how much time you go with your kids. And I think it was something like 90+% of the time that you're going to spend with your kids is before they're 18. And I can see that, right? I think most of us, like, once you move away from home, get a job, have a family, it's like maybe, see parents a few times a year. That makes sense, right? Like, the bulk of your time with your parents is when you're 18. And so those are the years I don't want to give up. And this idea of, like, do I want to check in on my daughters when they're 18 and see how they're doing and hope that it's all worked out? No, I want to like have very fine-tuned control and involvement in that process. And so in the same way, again, this is a loose analogy, I'm kind of rambling here, but you would not, you would, because people do. I would not want to lock away my money for 30 years and check in and hope that it's good down the road, because that is just so antithetical to how we think about money. The other thing is, when you're locking it away that long, like, which senator is alive today will still be there when you hit retirement? If you're 30 right now, you hit that age where you can start touching your 401k. So you turn 60, we'll call it 30 years from now. There might be 1 or 2 senators still in that are there, but there's going to be so much turnover there. Who knows where the country will be? Like, we have this absurd socialist march that I think is getting so extreme that even, like, the Democrat Party is going to have to reject it. But the idea that these laws are going to stay the same about the RMDs, the laws about when you can access it, right? Like, would you be surprised, for instance, if they change it from 59.5 to 64.5, if they just add 5 years that you can't touch it? I wouldn't be, because what are they going to do with it in the meantime? There's $40 trillion there. This is a prime source. I'm not of the opinion that they're going to change the law to start taking that, but I could see them increasing the age because what are they doing in the meantime? They're cash flowing that, right? They're doing all the things that we do and we have cash value. They're churning it. They're making money. They're leveraging it, baby, right? Like they're doing all of that stuff. And so if they can get 5 more years with it, I think that's a great, if I'm the system, like that's a great win if we can push back that age, right? And honestly, that would make sense because the numbers around retirement haven't scaled with life expectancy. And so you could make a very strong case from their perspective of, hey, retirement should be 10 years later than it is right now because people are living more than 10 years longer than when this was put in place. And we haven't changed these ages very much. So I would not be surprised if it's 65 is when you can access your 401k and 72 is the standard retirement age. And the RMDs start, I don't know, like a lot of things can change. Can they change it? Yes. Have they changed it recently? Yes. Will they change it again? Yes. Without a doubt, they will change this before you retire if you are in your 30s. And so I don't want to just check in and hope and base this all on a number. In the meantime, like I look at a number on the screen, I'm good to go, and I can check in when I'm 60. Like that's a hard no for me. All right, the stranger, handing it over to a manager you'll never meet, right? Just like you wouldn't send your kids. I mean, again, I would like to think you wouldn't just outsource the raising of your kids to a stranger, though clearly it happens a lot. But that is sort of the conventional CFP model, and that is exactly what we don't want to be when we have Remnant Frontier up and running. The idea, and of course, there's no horse that has been beaten to death more by us and that should be beat to death again than the average rate of return. The Dave Ramsey idea of the market average is 12%, and so you're going to have $3 million in your portfolio because we're going to take that every year. And in reality, in the actual market, where math actually happens, where the real world pokes its head in, you fall close to $1 million shy on that projection in just about any market scenario. So that idea, like that is buy and hope. It's dressed up as buy and hold, but I to me, that's not a way to plan, right? This handing it off to a stranger, handing it off to your CFP to manage it. And again, we will be doing that for people because people want that, and there is a demand for that because people don't want to be as intimately involved with their money. And maybe these two things kind of bridge because like I want to spend more time with my family, so I want to spend less time worrying about this. All right, cool. We got you. People do want that. Again, you don't need what we are going to offer if you want the basics, right? You don't need a CFP if you just want the maximum money by 65 in an ETF, right? If you want to outsource more than that, there are firms that will do that, and we will do that, and we will do that from the perspective I talked about in the beginning. So it doesn't have to be a stranger, but you certainly wouldn't send your kids to a total stranger. You know, at least I guess you would want to at least meet the teacher. You know, if we're taking that analogy further, and so the idea that we're deferring everything to later, that gets back to, do you want to check in at 18 to see how your kid turned out and then hope that it worked? No, and some of the assumptions here, like when we're talking about money, everything is based on when I turn 65, when I retire. Not much is said about if I don't make it to 65. Like as a father, me making it to 65, if I'm the breadwinner, is critical for this plan to work. How many things could poke the plan? Death, divorce, disability, liability, all these things. How many things could topple your plan? And are we actually accounting for all of that? Or are we just saying that if it works, if everything goes as planned, we'll have this amount of money, hopefully at 65. That doesn't resonate with me either. The same way that I don't want to check in with my girls when they're 18 and just hope everything went well. I'm going to be there the whole time. I'm going to treat my money like I treat my family because my money is how we live that life. My goal is if I did have to go back to work and get a W-2 job, if Remnant Finance, Remnant Frontier fall apart and I have to get a W-2 job and I'm now working for someone else, like I go back to full-time employment, my goal would be how do I steward this capital so that I can get back to what I have now, which is being able to spend much more time and be a lot more intentional about raising my girls. I would want to get back to this that I have. I would set that as a goal. And so I'm not going to check in at 18. I'm not going to check in with my money at 65. I'm going to treat my money like a part of my family. Of course, we cover, the GoFundMe test. If you don't wake up tomorrow, think through the implications. We talk about that all the time. But have you actually addressed that? That's a conversation we should have if you haven't. All right. And I'm going to wrap up here soon because I know I made a lot of these points. But the measurement, the yardstick that we're using, breaking it down or distilling it to kind of an oversimplification, it seems to me as if the industry standard is just net worth, right? I made this example, I made this point to a client recently. We're talking about net worth versus cash flow. My goal with Remnant Frontier is that we're going to be cash flow focused. We want to be able to raise that floor of guaranteed cash flow. And then on top of that, build in some variable but fairly structured cash flow, because I value cash flow so much more than net worth. That's the approach that I want to take to financial planning, monthly cash flow. I said, what if you found out in your home or in your hometown, there's this beautiful Victorian mansion, whatever, and you found out, someone contacted you from the city office and was like, it turns out this property is deeded in your name. We've been using it as a city building, and we're going to continue to use it as a city building. It's a historical building, so you can't sell it, you can't rent it because it's being used by the city. But it turns out, again, in this kind of fake scenario, but like, you actually own this property. This property is valued at $3 million. You own it outright. It's deeded to you and it's titled to you. We didn't know it was left to your family trust somehow, and the city has been using it for 25 years, and we're going to continue to use it. But that's pretty cool. You got a $3 million asset. And so now if you look at your net worth statement, could you add that to your net worth statement? Yeah, you could. You have $3 million of equity in a home. But if it's a home that, again, I'm really stretching here, but you can't sell it because it's used by the city. It's a historical site, whatever. You can't rent it out because there's no tenants in there because it's been turned into like, city offices or something. And then also somehow you can't borrow against it, right? Like the bank's not going to give you a HELOC against the equity of this home because of its status as a city, but something like that. But like, imagine this fake scenario where you can add $3 million to your net worth, and it could change nothing for you today, tomorrow, in retirement. It has no bearing on your cash flow at any point, right? It's a dead asset. It's on your net worth statement and it means zero. Of course, that's kind of like a comical, that's a stretch, but really, like, what does your net worth mean if it's not accessible, can't provide cash flow? And so when we look at the 401k model, it is just getting this balance up. That's really the only metric there is, right? There's nothing else. Like, if it's traditional, it's all going to be taxed no matter what you do. Everything you take out in the future is going to get taxed. And it's going to be taxed at 100% as income. In the Roth model, at least you're not getting taxed on the distributions there, but still, your measuring stick is just the number on the screen. Like, that is it. And so that gets into our discussion about contract wealth versus statement wealth. When you're looking at these projections, it's like, when I look at my whole life policy, if I run an in-force illustration, I know right now my floor. I know my cash value can never go lower than this. This is guaranteed asset. On the compliance side, when you're talking to financial planner, when you're talking asset management, or talking about your investment advisor, the word guarantee is like, never, ever, ever say that guarantee unless it is no joke guaranteed. My cash value floor right now is guaranteed. I've gotten non-guaranteed dividends, right, from the companies. When they pay those dividends and I use it to purchase PUA, then it goes into my cash value. Now it's guaranteed. It's moved over to the guaranteed side of the ledger. I have a no kidding floor that I can say with contractual certainty is guaranteed to be there, right? I can't say guarantees anywhere else. And so I talk about contract wealth. For instance, if you have a military pension and a VA claim, right? Like, you have contract wealth there. With certainty what is going to be hitting your account each month, each year, right? That is contract wealth. Versus statement wealth is, here's your snapshot in time, but this number could go down tomorrow. It's also we're hoping that it grows by a certain year, right? But that idea of contract wealth versus statement wealth, I think, is very well highlighted by the distinction between the two kind of ideologies we talk about here, or the stagnant river versus the stagnant pond versus the flowing river, right? Cash flow is a flowing river. Net worth is a static pond, or it can be. You could have a phenomenal net worth and phenomenal cash flow, but if you just value net worth and you have assets that contribute greatly to net worth, like 401k and home equity, which is the majority of wealth in America, that don't contribute to cash flow, then you're valuing a larger stagnant pond at the expense of flowing fresh water, right? And so that analogy, to me, it's like, going back, like, as far as raising the kids there, it's like, I want my kids to continue to grow with me, not just leave them somewhere and hope for the best. Again, very loose analogy here. So to kind of bring this all together, I'm kind of shooting all over the place with these analogies here, and I know that, but I'll sum it up with: treat your capital like family. Your capital feeds the people you love. Stop treating it like a stranger's science project. Don't give it to someone else to do what they're going to do with it and hope to get it back in decades, and it's where you need it to be. Order of operations matters here. Protect, save, grow in that order. If you're doing it in another order, you're leaving a lot of risk. You're accepting a lot of risk that you don't need to accept. Remember, you're your greatest asset, your human life value. Are you insured? Are you protecting that asset so that it's here to earn for your family, whether you're here or not? Money is not math. That is a kind of a slogan that we got from Trent Fortner. I'm not sure who else said that before, but a mentor of ours. Money is not math. Math is not money. We can look at these spreadsheet calculations, but behavior matters more. Our understanding and our process in place, like having the framework in place, having the understanding in place, matters more than the number on the screen today, especially if that number has no bearing necessarily on the future, right? If that number could get cut in half, over the course of the next month, which depending on your allocation is very reasonable, that is not certainty, and that is not a strategy for success in my mind. Don't treat your money like math. Money is not math. Money is the oil in the engine of your relationship as far as how you provide for your family. It's the oil in the system here. So treat it like family. Treat your money like family. Don't outsource it. Think about that very loose analogy of kids to a 401k. You would never raise your kids with the rules that you apply to a 401k. Of course, my children are infinitely more valuable than dollars, but the more I can acquire and wisely steward the dollars that flow into my life, the better I can, equip my children, the more comfort they have, the more I'm able to pour into them without, stressing about work. So anyways, I know that's kind of all over the place, but I've had this thought of, raising kids like a 401k. And so I wanted to try to get into some kind of a comprehensive framework, some kind of discussion. And I don't know that I succeeded at making it clear and concise. But this one might actually clock in at under 1 hour. Just think through, be willing to assume that maybe the default option that everyone should be doing is a 401k. Like, be willing to question that. And that's all I got for you this week. Hopefully be back with you next week with a guest and maybe a little bit more coherence. So, all right, cheers, y'all.
Thanks for listening to Remnant Finance. If you found any value at all in this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend.
Remember, true financial freedom comes from taking control of your personal economy and breaking free from the status quo. So stop being a passenger in your family's financial future.
Boldly take back control of your wealth. Until next time,
this is Brian and Hans signing off.